All politics is identity politics. Hey everybody, this is DeAnna. Welcome to Identity Politics. Now obviously events in Minnesota have been taking most of our attention over the last few weeks, but ICE raids are taking place throughout the country, including, of course, in Portland, Oregon. Now a note about Oregon. In 1859, when it became a state, it did so with a black exclusion law. The law stated no free Negro or mulatto not residing in the state at the time of the adoption of this Constitution shall come, reside, or be within this state or hold any real estate. And more people voted in favor of that than voted in favor of ratifying the state constitution itself. White nationalism, a proud American tradition. Now, of course, Oregon still has a relatively small black population, but it is unfortunately getting more diverse, which is to say it's getting worse. It was about 78.5% white in 2010. It's only about 73.5% white as of 2022. But really, it's more than that. Even maybe 15 years ago, if you went to Portland, you had the feeling you had when you went to European cities maybe 15 years ago. Like, man, you can actually have cities that are filled with white people. They're clean. There isn't garbage everywhere. It's functional. There's some semblance of a culture. Now, maybe it's not the culture I particularly like. In fact, it's a lot of what I don't like. But you could say the same thing about San Francisco or LA or even Austin 15 years ago. It was at least something. To some extent, it worked. But this has gone south along with all these other places, and I feel like there's a lesson here. Like, people will say things like, well, we need to go back to the 1990s when people didn't see race. Like, I'm a liberal, but like Bill Clinton, not this woke stuff. I support LGP, but not the T. All this kind of like, look, it doesn't work this way. The revolution doesn't go to a certain point and then you just get to freeze it at the moment when it's the most advantageous to you. And then you just don't have to worry about it going any farther. It's not like that. Things just keep going to their logical conclusion. And more than that, and this is something pretty screwed up, but it's been something that's been occurring to me more and more often recently. There's something deeply sinister about progressivism, not even progressivism, maybe just like human nature. I mean, look at Minnesota, right? We've talked about this. You basically had the dream of middle-class liberalism. You've got your healthcare, you've got your welfare state, you've got no corruption, it's clean, everybody's happy, all the rest. Like, this is what people supposedly want. But what did people decide? Let's import infinity Somalians and blow it all up. You know what? We've got this working state, but you know what we really need? We need like 2 million Haitians. This is what, obviously, this will make things better. And yeah, look, I know not everybody supported this. And if you had a majority vote, it's not like we ever get to vote on these sorts of things. But maybe if you had a majority vote, people would have voted against it. But the fact is, right now, we're seeing it. You have ordinary, affluent, educated people willing to fight and kill and die to make sure their state becomes a dump. Same thing in Sweden. I mean, nobody talks about the Nordic model of democratic socialism anymore because guess what? They imported the dregs of the third world and nothing works anymore. But people don't listen to those who predicted the disaster and they resist the obvious solutions. And you even see it with something like Portland. You have this city 15 years ago. Sure, yeah, it's a liberal city, mostly white. But if you're white, it's the kind of culture you like if you're a progressive. It kind of works. It's outside the mainstream, sort of, but you still got your bourgeois comforts. It's artsy, it's independent. But what do? It's one of the whitest major cities in the United States, still 64% white as of around 2023. So what do? You have to blow it up. You have to self-destruct. It's just something inherent in progressivism. You get it as good as you can be, according to your own standards. Like, you actually succeed. You actually get what you want, and then you just have to nuke the thing.
Did you know that the first Matrix was designed to be a perfect human world where none suffered, where everyone would be happy? It was a disaster. No one would accept the program. Entire crops were lost. Some believed that we lacked the programming language to describe your perfect world, but I believe that as a species, human beings define their reality through misery and suffering. So the perfect world was a dream that your primitive cerebrum kept trying to wake up from.
Now, Portland today, and I don't think I'm out of line here, it's basically the most Antifa-friendly city in the United States. You need to talk about how it's on stolen land. In the schools, you have to make clear that you can't discipline students without considering race and gender identity. You can't just punish students who misbehave, right? You have to develop a support plan, according to the law, which must take into consideration the impact of issues related to a student's trauma, race, gender, identity presentation, and of course, the identity and the presentation may be two different things, sexual orientation, and restorative justice as appropriate for the student. That was from the Washington Free Beacon back in 2023. This is how they actually run the schools. And of course, what else do you have to do? You have to tolerate crime. Doesn't matter if you now have break-ins everywhere. It doesn't matter if you have theft. Doesn't matter if you have assault. People can't operate businesses anymore. In February 2024, outdoor retailer REI, and again, outdoorsy stuff, right? You sort of associate Portland with hiking and nature and this whole type of culture, shut down its only store in Portland after 20 years. Why? This was from the Oregonian at the time. It's basically because the city refused to stop crime. Quote from this article. In an email to customers Monday, REI said its store in Portland, quote, had its highest number of break-ins and thefts in 2 decades, despite actions to provide extra security. It plans to close the location ahead of its lease expiration in February. REI is the latest major retailer to close Portland stores, and the highest profile among them to publicly blame theft as the reason. Nike closed one of its Portland stores to public access, telling city officials the closure was due to shoplifting. Walmart also recently closed its only 2 Portland stores for underperformance. Retailers large and small, meanwhile, say theft is a growing problem in Portland and that city officials have been slow to respond, unquote. Now, also in this article, they talked about what they were trying to do to stop theft. The store spent something like $800,000 just to stop shoplifting. And it wasn't enough. Because the city is just like, we don't care. And why would you care, right? If you arrest people for committing crimes, no matter how you do it, this is why a superhero would never work in real life. All you're going to do is disproportionately arrest non-whites. And maybe in Portland, some white revolutionaries who think shoplifting is how we get to communism or something. So either way, it's racist or you're punishing your political allies, which you're not going to do. So you just don't do it. And so you just can't have stores anymore. Now, I try to be fair here. I don't want to exaggerate. There have been some signs of recovery in recent years. Portland had a record for homicides in 2022, but crime has been declining since then. Of course, if you're coming down from a record, it's pretty hard for it not to decline, but it is getting a little better. But you still have this sense of rot that just wasn't there 15 years ago. It's ameliorating, but it's not being reversed. It's just being toned down. And even that may be stopping. When we began this show, we were covering the near nightly protests, really riots, against the ICE headquarters in the city. Well, ICE has been undertaking operations in Portland, as with many other cities. Recently, ICE took down, shot 2 illegal immigrants. They had ties to the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, TDA. This is not being disputed by anyone. Portland Police Chief addressed this connection at a press conference. He said, quote, they do have some nexus to involvement with TDA. We can confirm that. But then he went a lot farther. Take a look.
I can confirm, first and foremost, that these 2 individuals are in stable condition. They are still hospitalized. They are in custody of the federal law enforcement, but grateful that they appear to be on the road to recovery, and I'm grateful for that. They do have some nexus to involvement with TDA. We can confirm that, and what I can say is there is an association with the 2 folks yesterday and TDA. I hesitated to even share this information initially because I'm very aware of the historic injustice of victim blaming, oftentimes portrayed by law enforcement, including this very agency that I've represented so proudly for so many years. And historically, we have not been quick to disclose the potential criminal history of others. I want to speak for just a moment specifically to my Latino community. It saddens me that we even have to qualify these remarks, because I understand or at least have attempted to understand through your voices, your concern, your fear, your anger. This information in no way is meant to disparage or to condone or support or agree with any of the actions that occurred yesterday.
Now, I'm going to need some of the white monster before we get into this. There's a lot to unpack here. There's a whole pathology. The plight of the white man can be summarized in the entire segment you just saw. I mean, first of all, forget every old TV show where you have like the grizzled police chief or sheriff or whoever fights crime in the big city. Even something like the cynical guy out of The Wire or something like that, where it's like, well, boy, there's just nothing we can do. Them streets are too wild for anybody to tame. No, like, it's not like that. Anyone who's in any kind of a position in these sorts of cities is like what you just saw. Every single one of them. They're all political appointees, and especially if you're not like a black female lesbian or something like this is what you're going to have to act like. I mean, think of what he said. First of all, what's the first thing he said? He expresses gratitude that the gangbangers are getting better, that they weren't killed. Why? And we're paying for this, of course, them being illegals. Why is this some great boon for all of us? What exactly makes our lives better about these people not being put down? And of course, do we get this kind of teary tribute to actual crime victims in Portland, which happens all the time? No, of course not. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about the innocents. But to me, the really important part, his hesitancy to give out this information. Now, this is something we see in police departments around the country. We're not going to publish mugshots anymore, right? We're not going to publish data with who commits the crimes. That's a huge frustration for me and for American Renaissance, because we used to be able to compile all these reports for all these different cities. Like, look, this is what's actually happening. Now you can't do it. Why? Because they don't want us to know. Because it's true. And there's this infantile belief that if we just don't speak certain things, if we don't allow this information to get out, it just kind of goes away. And here's what really sucks. In the political sense, this is basically true. Like, if the media doesn't report something, it doesn't really exist. It doesn't matter. If a crime doesn't get endless coverage, it's really of no importance. If you don't have the close-in zoom of the person crying or something, normal people aren't going to care. So if you have crime, but you don't report that crime, and you don't say who's committing the crime, and maybe you don't even put the crime in the official statistics anymore, as we know was happening in Washington, D.C. before Trump sent the guard in, did the crime even happen? So, go back to this police chief. Why is he so upset that he's having to release this information? Because he's saying, yeah, they're affiliated with this gang. The following narratives are confirmed. This gang is operating in our city. What ICE did makes sense and is in line with its mission. They were posing a threat. And all three of these things contradict what everyone wants to believe. These are our neighbors. They didn't do nothing. ICE is randomly shooting people because they're a fascist death squad. It's just nothing could be happening. Now that's all gone. But he still can't say they were right, even when he knows it. Instead, look at the next thing he says. He attacks the very institution that he leads. It has blamed the victim in the past. Now, again, these people aren't victims, and we'll get to that in a second, but, leave that aside. At the same time as he paints his own organization, the police department, as this bastion of racism and victim blaming, he also says it's the agency that I've represented so proudly. Well, why the hell are you representing it so proudly if it's so evil? I mean, this is the way liberals talk about patriotism. America is evil, it was founded on white settler colonialism and racism and genocide, and it's all stolen land, and slavery is the original sin, and we need to have a reckoning with our entire history, and we need to revolutionize every single institution. But don't question my patriotism. I'm proud to be an American. And of course, everybody in the world is a potential American, so there's nothing to be proud of. And this is how they think about these things. And you see the same thing with the police department. I'm proud to be a police officer, but the police department is a legacy of racism and slavery and victim blaming. Okay. And then, of course, finally, look, and it's not just me saying this. This is them. You don't have to believe a thing I say. Look at the other side. All politics is identity politics. The head of the police department has to negotiate with my Latino community. I mean, it could be worse, I suppose. At least he didn't say like, hola, my Latinx friends or whatever stupid thing. But notice he still assumes, like he just assumes, that my Latino community is heartbroken that these gang members, or at the very least, to be fair, people affiliated with this Venezuelan gang got shot. Why? Why would random Hispanics care? Why would they feel sad about this? Why would they automatically sympathize with foreign violent criminals unless he simply takes for granted racial solidarity? Unless he simply assumes that overwhelms all other concerns, which I think is the undercurrent of many white progressives. They know racial solidarity is natural and healthy, and they acknowledge it, and they support it for everyone except whites. Now, I actually don't know if this is really true when it comes to this issue. I was actually surprised by the number of Hispanics that backed Trump in 2024, even as he ran on a program of mass deportations. And even if you don't buy that, I mean, because I'm not accepting that necessarily, but why would Hispanics, American Hispanics, automatically be supporting Venezuelan gang members? And more to the point, and this is the critical thing, if they were, wouldn't that be proof that every single one of these people needs to go on a racial basis alone? Wouldn't that kind of racial solidarity be in and of itself evidence that they cannot be assimilated, that they are inherently a hostile force that's going to align with criminals, foreign criminals, purely out of racial solidarity, and we can't coexist with them? I mean, this is what he is saying. This is what the head of the police department is saying, if you think it through. But it doesn't even come up. And you have to follow these sorts of incentives to keep your job. But it's more than that. I mean, he's not just doing this to keep his job, although that's part of it, but you can tell, like, he means it. I mean, that's the terrifying thing, that he's not just lying. And this is a spiritual sickness. This guy, Bob Day is his name. You can tell that the idea of taking his own side in a collective sense has just never occurred to him. And he'd be horrified if it did. Now, incidentally, what actually happened in this case, DHS put up a statement around it. And there's actually, it's a pretty serious thing. They didn't just shoot these people for no reason. This is from DHS, and I quote, "Yesterday, 2 suspected Tren de Aragua gang associates let loose on American streets by Joe Biden weaponized their vehicle against Border Patrol in Portland. The agent took immediate action to defend himself and others, shooting them. The driver of the vehicle, Luis David Nico Moncada, is a criminal illegal alien from Venezuela and suspected Tren de Aragua gang member. He illegally entered the U.S. in 2022 and was released into the country by the Biden administration. Since then, he was arrested for DUI and unauthorized use of a vehicle. He has a final order of removal. The passenger, Yolanis Elizabeth Zambrino Contreras from the Dagobah system, or Venezuela, I thought Dagobah, but Venezuela. Criminal illegal alien is associated with Tren de Aragua. She illegally entered the U.S. in 2023 near El Paso, Texas, and was released into this country by the Biden administration. Since illegally entering, she played an active role in a Tren de Aragua prostitution ring and was involved with a prior shooting in Portland." This is who they're defending. This is who the police chief is crying over on television. This is who Biden let into the country. This is who people are rioting to keep in the country. This is who they refuse to deport. And this is who they expect, as a matter of course, every single Hispanic in the country to show racial solidarity with. Now, I don't want to do like the Dems are the real racist thing here, but I mean, really, it's hard not to. Like, this is what they're going with. This is what they think Hispanics support. And furthermore, this is precisely what the most educated, the most informed, let's face it, people, probably the smartest in terms of pure IQ, white people in the country, the elite human capital, so to speak, this is what they believe. This is what they support. Because they're easily propagandized. Because intelligent people are given to these all-encompassing systems that explain the world. They're impervious to facts that get in the way of their theories, because you can always explain away inconvenient facts. Like, it does take a certain amount of intelligence to be convinced of obviously stupid things, like Venezuelan gang members are our moral superiors and our nation's strength. But this is where we are. And if you doubt me, go to any university in the country and listen to the way they talk. I mean, last night I was on a Twitter space, X space, I guess, but it doesn't quite click. Twitter space last night. I had Paul Kersey, Dan Lyman, Oilfield Rando, Tom Hennessy. And, this kind of thing came up. The administration is deporting murderers and rapists and child molesters and all the rest. But nobody who matters cares, right? And really, it's more than that. The worse these people are, the more virtuous you are for defending them. And I think this does eventually boil into a kind of furious resentment of just normal people, even victims of violent criminals, the feeling that they have it coming in some sense because they're not getting with the program. And more than this is the hatred of people like you and me who dissent from racial orthodoxy. We're like the wreckers and the kulaks in the USSR. If we would just shut up, or if we would just be killed, then the program will work this time. And this also explains why it's precisely the most respectable, moderate, establishment organs that are the most unhinged when it comes to attacking people for ideological heresy. And of course, there's a specific example right now. As you might know, Scott Adams just died. He was a cartoonist who created Dilbert. That's what he was. He was a cartoonist. He didn't lead some giant organization. He wasn't a hate campaigner. He didn't spearhead some extreme ideological movement. He had a cartoon that made fun of office life, which was mostly popular in the 1990s, and people would hang them on their cubicles. That was what he did. And he became moderately political during the 2016 election when he suggested that Donald Trump was like a master communicator or something and was going to win. And all the journalists laughed at him. But of course, he had the last laugh. And so then he was taken seriously as sort of a political commentator, and it gave him a certain conservative audience. But he was never like a knee-jerk right-wing guy. If anything, one of the things he talked about that I think is part of his legacy that matters to all of us is he talked about the way we live in a bifurcated reality. Like people see the same thing and they interpret it fundamentally differently. Like you can't just show people the facts or a video and expect them to take your side anymore. Shooting of this woman in Minneapolis being a great example. Most of us see she looked at the officer, she floored the gas, she ignored the instructions. It's not even controversial. You act like that, you're going to get lit up. But liberals see the same video and they say, well, she told the officer she wasn't mad at him. She smiled. This was murder by an agent of the state because obviously, like, when a woman says, well, I'm not mad at you, she's not going to try to kill you afterward. I mean, certainly no guy's ever experienced anything like that. The point is, it's an example of what Scott Adams called two movies on one screen. It's not just that each side is coming away with radically different interpretations of what they are seeing. It's that each side is basically unaware that the other interpretation even exists. And if you think through what that means, there comes a point where there is no solution through dialogue. And I think we've basically reached that point in this country. Now, Scott Adams had some ideas that some people might call weird about like hypnosis and the simulation, manifesting reality, whatever. We all have our quirks. I don't really care. But what got him in trouble, what is now defining his entire life, what is no exaggeration to say cost him hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, was this.
So if nearly half of all blacks are not okay with white people, according to this poll, not according to me, according to this poll, that's a hate group. That's a hate group. And I don't want to have anything to do with them. And I would say, based on the current way things are going, the best advice I would give to white people is to get the hell away from black people. Just get the fuck away. Wherever you have to go, just get away. Because there's no fixing this. This can't be fixed. Right? This can't be fixed. You just have to escape. So that's what I did. I went to a neighborhood where, I have a very low black population. Because unfortunately, there's a high correlation between the density. And this is according to Don Lemon, by the way. So here I'm just quoting Don Lemon when he notes that when he lived in a mostly black neighborhood, there were a bunch of problems that he didn't see in white neighborhoods. So even Don Lemon sees a big difference in your own quality of living based on where you live and who's there. So I think it makes no sense whatsoever as a white citizen of America to try to help black citizens anymore. It doesn't make sense. It's no longer a rational impulse. And so I'm gonna back off from being helpful to black America because it doesn't seem like it pays off. Like I've been doing it all my life, and the only outcome is I get called a racist. That's the only outcome. It makes no sense to help black Americans if you're white. It's over. Don't even think it's worth trying. Totally not trying. And there we go. You didn't expect that today, did you? But those who don't want to focus on education, you just need to get away from them. Just get as much distance as you can. That's my...
Now, this was all based on a Rasmussen poll that found 46% of black voters either disagreed with or had no opinion about the phrase, "it's okay to be white." And Mr. Adams argued that if this is the case, that's a hate group. With the current way things are going, the best advice I would give to white people is to get the hell away from black people because there is no fixing this. Which is more or less the story of white people over the last half century. The suburbs exist for a reason. Now, Adams did try to blame some white people in the media for fostering racial divisions. He went so far as to say that was the main problem. You could get into the whole thing of whether those people creating these divisions actually see themselves as white or whatever else, but of course, there are obviously some suicidal whites, some white people who honestly believe this kind of stuff. Your Tim Walz, some of these protesters, whatever. Whites do share some of the blame, but this is not just white suicide or empathy out of control. It's not white people just being wacky for some reason. An abused group may share some responsibility for collaborating with the abuser, but it's not entirely to blame. I reject the idea that this is just purely suicide. And white advocates could add that most people pushing segregated graduations are black. Most blacks think race is central to their identity. The whole point of critical race theory is to argue that even formally colorblind institutions are racist because they were built by white people. Most whites do not think race is central to their identity, but today, indifference to race, what they call colorblindness, is itself defined as another form of racism. If racism, if ethnocentrism, if racial identity itself are problems, it's not white people who suffer from them. And yet we're the ones who get all the blame. I mean, what Scott Adams was really doing is he was taking black activists at their word. And he said that in response, whites should no longer inflict our harmful presence on blacks. And that was apparently career-ending. And it proves that we're in an impossible position. We can't be around blacks without being inherently racist, but we can't leave either. So what do? We're expected to just sit there and wallow in endless guilt and pay for everything. And if we don't, we suffer even more punishment, as Scott Adams learned. At the same time, simply walking away, simply recognizing that a huge percentage of blacks do not like white people and disproportionately commit crime against us, that's hate. That's a rant. That's borderline violence. The actual violence, the murders, the rapes, the fact of us that none of us can go to a normal public school anymore, the fact that all our neighborhoods have been destroyed, that we were ethnically cleansed from our own places in the 60s and 70s and then blamed for it, the fact that so many of us work jobs we hate at locations far away from our homes to pay outrageous taxes to essentially babysit this entire race of people that lives at our expense and hates us for it, none of that even registers. No. Hate is recognizing, even in the smallest sense, that this is even happening. That's where we're at. Now, again, the poll that started all this was Rasmussen doing the okay to be white meme, which of course was a right-wing troll campaign, according to the media. Whether it is or it isn't, respondents were simply reacting to the assertion. Like, I don't think people who were talking about this were actually, well, is this a media scandal or something? No, they were just responding. Do you think it is wrong to say it's okay to be white? Was the problem somehow that Scott Adams didn't know it's okay to be white was a troll, or that he did know? And if a guy who's always online and media engaged didn't know, why would respondents to a Rasmussen poll be familiar with 4chan lore? And anyone putting up signs that say it's okay to be white, as people did, will be accused of racism. You might even be investigated by the police. Whether it started as a troll or not, it showed the way the system functions in reality. And that's why it was successful, and that's why it's important. And speaking for himself, Adams said he took the poll at face value. And if Rasmussen itself was too conservative-leaning or somehow not credible, and therefore he shouldn't have used this poll, that actually supports Adams' argument. Because Rasmussen trumped up this poll at the time as proof that most voters reject anti-white beliefs. Like if the poll had a goal, it was to prove the opposite of Adams' point. It wanted to show that most Americans, including blacks, reject wokeness because this is what conservatives want to believe. But that's not reality. I mean, the best way to summarize this position and everything that happened, whites need to end a destructive relationship in which we are abused just for existing. And if journalists and activists think it's hateful for whites to disengage, that exposes the central contradiction of American race relations. In the view of our rulers, whites and whiteness are harmful, but sparing blacks the agony of being around us is even worse. We can neither stay nor leave. If this was a relationship between two people, you would call it abuse. You would call it toxic. And of course, the reason this was such a big deal was not just about Adams, but they used it to go after Elon Musk. At the time, the Washington Post went after him, and they said, because Elon Musk said, well, what are they complaining about? And Elon Musk said the media is racist against whites and Asians. And the Washington Post said, the billionaire's comments continue a pattern of Musk expressing more concern about the free speech, in scare quotes from the Washington Post, of people who make racist or anti-Semitic comments than about the comments themselves, wrote the Post's Will Ormius. Musk's views on race have been the subject of scrutiny both at Twitter, where he has reinstated far-right accounts, including those of neo-Nazis and others previously banned for hate speech, and at Tesla, which has been the subject of multiple lawsuits alleging a culture of rampant racism and sexual harassment in the workplace. Like any journalist, this guy at the Post was way more eager to police what people say rather than defend free speech, which again, he put in scare quotes. And he wasn't alone. I mean, this is articles from the time. The Guardian, Elon Musk backs Dilbert cartoonist Scott Adams following racist tirade. I mean, you just listen to what he said. Does that sound like a tirade? Was he foaming at the mouth and screaming? No, but apparently this is all it takes. Elon Musk tweets support for Dilbert creator after racist tirade. Elon Musk defends Dilbert cartoonist Adams after racist rant. This is from the San Francisco Chronicle. And so on and so on and so on. Now, if you're naive, you may marvel at this kind of repetitive emotional language, but many journalists really do think that their job is to decide what people are and are not allowed to say. And here's the thing, it continues after you're dead. Like the fact that Scott Adams once noticed that black people don't like white people very much and act in such a way that would obviously be called racist if racism was ever meant to be a universal standard. That's the only thing that matters about his life and death. So the man just died, and this is what they're doing, the Boston Globe. Scott Adams, the creator of satirical comic strip Dilbert, who veered into racist far-right commentary. Like that's his legacy. People calls him a disgraced Dilbert creator. And incidentally, Matt Walsh pointed out that this is the person who supposedly wrote this article for People. I couldn't stop laughing. I mean, it's exactly what you would expect. And then, of course, the New York Times piles on too. I mean, this is all you're known for. And again, what were the racist comments? It was noticing what was directed against us. It wasn't anything against blacks themselves. And then he even went farther and blamed white people, some might say a little disingenuously, but knowing the way Adams was, I think he was honestly saying his opinion, blaming white people for most of the racial division. And even that was still too much. Even when you're victim blaming, you're still a racist. And that one moment of heresy defines your entire life and death. Like, we are the most heavily propagandized people in the entire world. It's insane if you actually take a step back and think about it. It's North Korea levels. And we go through life this way, but we don't really stop to recognize how crazy it really is. It's like the fish in water, right? We're just so surrounded by it that we don't even really notice it. But then every once in a while, somebody notices it and everybody goes nuts. And this is especially true when it comes to race and talking about black resentment against whites. Because leftists brag about it all the time. I mean, what is the most common response you get online if you say, hey, black people are disproportionately violent? What are you going to get right back? Say that to my face. I'll kill you. Yeah, I know. You're impulsive and violent. All right, I'm going to get in trouble for this. But lest some of you think I've gotten soft in my old age, or maybe this actually proves it, I'm quite familiar with some of the shall we say, WN 1.0 type literature. And I shouldn't say this, but it's too good. There was this guy, Harold Covington, who wanted to have a whites-only country in the Pacific Northwest. He wrote this series of books about a violent revolution where this guerrilla army wins, creates it. This is the kind of thing, by the way, you used to be able to just buy off Amazon. Like, nobody cared about this kind of stuff like 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And in passing, don't asked me to recall the context or whatever. But one of these characters in this book, and of course they're all perfect and unbeatable and without flaws, right? He says something to the effect that non-whites know when whites have gotten their courage back, that they can understand the difference between what we used to be and Dilbert. He uses Dilbert as the ultimate stand-in for the kind of wimpy, deracinated, man without chest type modern white dude. And then, of course, fast forward however many years, and Dilbert becomes the avatar of frustrated normal white guys who notice what's happening to us. That kind of tells you something. And white advocates could feel a mix of vindication and frustration about all of this because we've spent years writing and talking about racial double standards and posting about black attacks on white people. And finally, other people who have something to lose are beginning to notice. And guess what? They did lose things. Like, the reason people with something to lose usually keep silent is because you lose these things right away. I think Scott Adams said he lost like 80% of his income. And the system has grown even more intolerant of anyone who speaks obvious truths. It relies on power and censorship to shut down discussion. This is what it is. It is no longer an open society, if it ever was. And while they have lost the ability to simply shut things down in the United States, that is not true in Europe. That is not true in the UK. That is certainly not true in Australia. We'll talk all about that on the live stream tomorrow at 7 p.m. And if the Democrats return to power, we are going to see the same thing here. And even the extremely mild comments of someone like Scott Adams were punished with ruinous financial costs. I'm sure he could have used all that money, probably millions of dollars, when he was dealing with cancer, but it was gone. And that's why they did it. The more serious point is that it's not enough anymore to just be anti-white. Everything Scott Adams said was very carefully couched in defensive terms. If there's a problem, fundamentally, it's our fault. No, that's not good enough. But it still didn't give him a fair hearing. The media smeared him, cost him his career, mocked him in death. And yeah, regardless of what you say, regardless of how carefully you put it, blacks do not like you. And there is no fixing this, as he said. What it really comes down to is, do you want to be liked by a society like this? Is it actually a kind of tribute when their media mocks you after you die? When they run their hit pieces to mark their death? I mean, let's level with each other here. If you're fundamentally dissatisfied with the society in which you live, to some extent, you might say that there's something wrong with you. Maybe there's something a little off about both of us. Like if you're watching this, you're watching me, we're probably a little bit different than most people. But let's not get too carried away. I don't think we're just being contrarian. Like, you know, if we were in the 19th century, we'd be Marxists or something like that just because you have to rebel. No, I don't think that's true. If anything, I think that if we had a normal society, I'd probably be extremely bourgeois, because you have to recognize that what we're in now is not normal. This is not the way things are supposed to be. This is not historically how people behave. And when you're saying something that is obviously true, and which everybody knows is obviously true, costs you everything, they're actually wrong, not you. And more than that, it's a society that we're in without honor. Compared to most societies where honor is the most important thing you can have. Like, you are expected to grovel and beg for scraps from weak people who despise you. And they call this morality. And think again of that police chief in Portland. If you don't feel a physical response of literal nausea, actual sickness at seeing that display, disgust akin to watching maggots consume a corpse, like, I don't know what to tell you. I'll say the guy who created Dilbert is a tougher, more honorable man than that phony cop any day. And say what you will about Scott Adams. Never apologized, never backed down. You can say, oh, well, he didn't go far enough, whatever else. But the fact is, if everybody acted that way, we would have already won. Now, my guest today is someone who can never be accused of backing down or not going far enough. Charles Haywood is a successful entrepreneur who now runs the website The Worthy House. He's the creator of the applied political philosophy Foundationalism. He incorporated the Society for American Civic Renewal and is definitely one of the more prominent commentators on the New Right. It's a real pleasure to have him with us today. Check it out. My guest today is one of the leading commentators on the New Right and somebody who's been making some predictions over the last few years that have played out more or less exactly correct. And clearly one of the most prominent is when he suggested that Elon Musk was basically going to be forced to cross the Rubicon, forced into a confrontation with political power because of the way things are developing. And now when you see what's been happening over the last couple of weeks, it's actually happening. And if anything, he's getting more radical. So, sir, thank you so much for joining us here today. I think that you've proven to be one of the more prescient analysts on here in terms of what's going to happen. And I have to ask, what do you think is coming next?
Well, it's a very broad question. And while I appreciate the prescience compliment, it's probably 50%, but maybe 60% on a good day. So, but I think I have had some predictions that came true. And unlike some other people, at least I'm willing to admit when my predictions are wrong. What's coming next? Well, that's a broad question. If I knew what was coming next, then I could both make money off of it and prepare better. But, the Musk thing, I think, is particularly interesting. My prediction, which was probably initially 3 or 4 years ago, it doesn't really require a lot of derivation. You just have to understand people's motivations. And since Musk, in his semi-autist way, his primary life goal is getting to Mars. And you can't get to Mars under the current regime for a variety of reasons, but primarily because the current regime is fundamentally extractive of competent people such as Musk, and also doesn't like competent people objectively because they show up the regime. And there's other angles too, but fundamentally, a man like that is going to realize that his dreams will be frustrated. Only, it's like Highlander, right? There can be only one. And whether Musk will ever take the full, cross the Rubicon officially, I've always said that the thing to watch out for is when Musk decides to create a private security force, right. Which he is not yet. But certainly in terms of his verbal statements, he's becoming more and more radical. Whether he has the personality to actually do it. I mean, one of my favorite quotes is, I think it was Cicero said about Julius Caesar, he was a man of supreme daring and hardened to every danger. I wouldn't describe Musk as either of those things. He may get there, but a guy who lacks discipline and has a bunch of random strange baby mamas and so on isn't necessarily a man who fits that description of Julius Caesar. Nonetheless, with his money and power, he's the logical candidate for someone who will attempt to destroy the existing regime.
Oh, he's kind of like Crassus in that sense.
Right. But I mean, Crassus, of course, was not hardened to every danger and was focused on the money. And Musk is paradoxically not really focused on the money. He's focused on the money as a tool to accomplish.
Right.
I mean, money's nice, but you see him running around blowing it on things? Of course not. I mean, he's not Jeff Bezos. He doesn't want the approbation of Hollywood stars, and he doesn't want a kind of rough wife like Bezos. He wants something else. So.
Yeah, right. Well, one of the things that more broadly it speaks to is this idea of the defection of the elites from the regime. Because to some extent, we saw this in the last election. You saw some of Silicon Valley swing behind Trump. People bring up Peter Thiel all the time. People talk about some of these corporate interests that are having a certain awareness that the cultural agenda that they've backed more or less for the last 60 years, if not longer, is ultimately going to eat them. Mm-hmm. But you still don't see them fully rallying behind the right in the way that left-wing analysts would predict. I mean, certainly what do leftists say? They say that big business is actually bankrolling nativism and anti-immigration sentiment and patriotism and all these things, when, of course, we know that the opposite is true. Nonetheless, it does seem that elites in this country are hedging their bets in a way that we haven't seen before.
I think that's certainly true. And I think the error that a lot of people fall into is and for some reason, this is a common modern error. Maybe it's because information flow is greater, or maybe it's because people don't know a lot of history. But they tend to say, well, since I can't see exactly what's going to happen and what the elites are going to do next week or next year, therefore, elite action in the present day is irrelevant. You see this with Trump as well. Like, people are always complaining about Trump, but fundamentally, all things develop organically. And so it doesn't really matter what Elon Musk thinks right now about what kind of rapprochement he may be able to reach with the regime. The question is he going to join in eroding or destroying the power of that regime? What will result from that is a totally different question and has relatively little to do with Musk's current intentions. Everything is a step process, and to try to predict with precision what's going to happen after initial material steps is kind of a fool's game. You can only kind of line up alliances and give some thought to what you hope the future state looks like. But complaining that Elon Musk right now is too much in bed with transhumanists, for example, like or is too in love with AI or so-called AI or what have you. I mean, those things are fundamentally irrelevant. The question is, will Musk participate in breaking the power of the current regime? That's the only relevant question. Whether or not he holds crazy ideas about how we're going to grow people in vats is completely irrelevant to the question at hand.
Right. Well, I suppose the broader question is, where does Trump fit into all this? Because certainly it seems that since the new year, the administration is on more or less a war footing. I mean, both abroad and at home. And this incident that happened in Minneapolis, this has to be the first time in my lifetime I can recall where blood has been shed and the right wing didn't immediately apologize and fall all over itself. Absolutely. I mean, they're not backing down even in the slightest. If anything, they're doubling down.
Yes, I was surprised by that, frankly, because my whole life, as you say, it's always an apology tour after something like this, and instantaneously there was no apology at all, and then none is going to be forthcoming, obviously, nor should there be, obviously. I think this is one of the most fascinating questions of the moment to me, which is, it's obvious, as you say, Trump is taking an aggressive approach. And yeah, sure, you can say he should do X or he should do Y. But the fact is that relative to what we could have expected a year ago, much less 5 years ago, we're getting an awful lot of stuff we never thought we would get. And the amazing thing is that Trump has been able to surround himself with competent men who are willing to take these risks and to take action. I would have assumed, or did assume, or thought at least, that after the attacks on everyone associated with Trump after his first term, that he'd be unable to get anybody except total grifters and opportunists to work for him. But that's not, in fact, the case at all. I mean, yeah, sure, a lot of people who work for him are grifters and opportunists, but many are not. And so, what are these people thinking? Right. I mean, if you're Stephen Miller, you're perfectly well aware, in part because they keep telling you, that their intention is to either kill you or put you in jail forever the instant Trump is no longer in power. It's like Stephen Miller gets up in the morning. Like, what goes through his head about 2029? I mean, you have a couple of possibilities. Either, well, we're going to win, or that's a problem for future Stephen Miller, or I'll solve that problem in a new, fresh way. I mean, So, I mean, who knows? I mean, I don't know what these people are thinking, but it's fascinating that they're willing to act in this fashion, knowing the risks involved. So maybe Musk, it doesn't have the characteristics of Julius Caesar that Cicero ascribed to him, but it appears that other men in the administration do.
Well, I want to get into some of the stuff that you've done and some of the writings that you're talking about, but I want to talk about this a little bit more just because it sort of sets the stage for everything else. For the first time in my life, it does seem, I mean, permanence is the illusion of every age, right? But for the first time in my life, it does seem that we could see like a real regime change, not just a change in administrations, but like the way the system is operating clearly is not going to keep working.
Yes.
There's no way to solve the immigration problem within the current system. I mean, right now, we're basically in the opening stages of a low-level civil conflict. I mean, it's nothing compared to what existed in the 60s and 70s, but it's clearly getting there. And you've got the temperature rising on all sides. You have the leftists openly talking about assassinating government officials and federal law enforcement. Is this it, basically? Because I think everybody assumes on the Republican side that once Trump goes, we're just going to kind of go back to normal. And I even flirted with that idea myself, but I don't think we're going back. I think this is just the new normal now.
Yeah, I mean, it's today's normal. I don't think we're going back. I will say, as far as the 60s and 70s go, well, there's certainly more violence in the early 70s. And the fact is that the difference there is that most of America, the vast majority of Americans, had no interest in that, didn't participate in that, voted for Nixon in 72 and so on. Here we have a broader level of division. We have whatever it is, 80% of single women think that violence against the right is wholly justified. You've seen these insane statistics.
Yeah, right.
That's really a new thing in American history. So I think the kind of surface level, we have less violence, certainly, but I think the kind of groundwork for a vastly greater amount of violence, like
that makes sense.
The FBI spent a lot of time in the 70s rolling up left-wing groups. Now the FBI spends no time rolling up left-wing groups, and even though they're much more extensive and powerful and well-funded. So where I think the potential exists for very rapid devolving, and my general opinion is that the things will continue more or less as they are now, maybe with some degeneration, until there's some kind of external shock. I mean, the most obvious external shock is like dollar failure or something like that, which so far we've been able to avoid. You could also imagine an external shock like losing a war with China or Taiwan or something like some existential shock. That is more a kind of spiritual shock. An economic shock where people don't know where the next meal is coming from, I think will be much more likely to heighten tensions rapidly and kind of bring to the fore these conflicts bubbling beneath the surface. So to the extent things are going to degenerate, that's probably what's going to lead to it. But we're not going back to the days of Mitt Romney being the Republican nominee, or, I mean, there are plenty of Republicans like Mitt Romney. And so,
yeah, right.
I mean, obviously, Trump is totally unable to get any of his agenda through Congress because Congress is a bunch of Catamites on the Republican side. I mean, not even getting to the left-wing side of Congress. But I think it's very hard to say exactly what's going to happen. I don't get a prize for saying that.
No, but it does seem like we're in a situation where the political solutions are becoming, the electoral solutions, I should say, because every real solution is still a political solution. But the system solutions, the electoral solutions are gradually becoming exhausted. I mean, at this point, what President Trump is doing, for example, I mean, he's just carrying out the agenda that he was elected on. And yet you see not just resistance from his own party, but even from the right-wing intelligentsia, if I can use that like, well, we didn't sign up for this. This is too much. Yeah. And it's like, well, if we can't deliver on this, what are we even doing? What are we even talking about?
Right-wing intelligentsia is completely irrelevant to everything. I mean, it's the only reason we hear about it is because for years they've been kind of the face of the so-called right. But that kind of intelligentsia has no kind of historical freight. And Jonah Goldberg will not be remembered for anything except for being overweight. And so, but the thing you see with Trump attempting to implement his agenda, and you see Republicans aiding in this, is the age-old inevitable action of the left to deny any legitimacy to any right-leaning or right-wing electoral success in a supposedly democratic system. That is, and you saw this in Spain in the 30s and Finland in the 1919. The left's entire approach is any right success is ipso facto of itself illegitimate. And so that's why there's no electoral solution, because this is what Carl Schmitt called, he identifies one of the fatal defects of parliamentary democracy, the tendency, though he applied it to all parties, to deny your opponents equal chance, which is and specifically through using typically the claim of emergency. And this is, right now there's no emergency to claim, but that would certainly be when the left attempts to fully strip the right of any possibility of equal chance, they would claim some kind of emergency. I mean, maybe they might reach real far down and say climate emergency or something gay like that. But,
threat to democracy is what I'd bet on.
Right. I mean, threat to democracy is very handy because it has exactly zero parameters. So, yeah, something like that. I mean, but I think it's only going to happen either when there's some kind of external shock, like I say, or if the right wins a significant electoral victory in 2028. But to be fair, I predicted that in 2024, and it didn't come to pass. So, your mileage may vary.
Well, one of the things that we're obviously facing down the barrel of is in the wake of this shooting, I mean, whether we like it or not, whether we agree whether it was justified or not, if you look at public support for ICE, it has been declining in the last few weeks, although it still has majority support, or plurality support, I should say, depending on what poll you look at. But let's face it, the only thing most people are seeing, because most people are not watching the video and the media, God knows, is not giving people the real facts. They're just seeing headline, ICE shoots woman. And so therefore, that's all they're acting on. And you even have guys like Joe Rogan and these sort of podcast bros being like, well, we don't want the government like asking people for papers and stuff like that on the streets, which of course is another way of saying we want mass deportations, but we don't actually want to see the process being done. Now in Europe, of course, they're talking about remigration and all these different policies, but if people don't have the stomach for something like this, what exactly can we hope to achieve? And because a lot of the scenarios that we have talked about and people in our sphere have talked about presuppose that the right wing has the willpower to actually see something through. And now it seems like maybe that's not true.
I think that's right. I think there's a certain amount of misplaced focus. It's not necessarily misplaced. It's misplaced because the Trump administration doesn't have any choice. The proper answer is simply to aggressively criminalize any employment of illegal of people who aren't citizens, to deny, to strip temporary protected status, to strip, end all refugee status, to basically to encourage massive self-deportation, forbid remittances, forbid buying of homes by people who are citizens, except for immediately you can create things for special cases. But since Congress won't pass those things, and if Congress did pass those things, judges would immediately countermand them. Fundamental problem is that the actual solutions are much easier than mass deportations by ICE agents on the street. But they can't be implemented because the system is rigged in a way to
right.
But
that's an excellent point.
If you had the power, that is, if you cowed the judges, which would be easy, you could. If the Republicans in Congress were aligned properly, you could simply impeach every judge you didn't like, which is in the Constitution, throw them out, replace them with judges who are guaranteed to do what you say, that is to follow the Constitution, and then you could pass laws, so you're easily saying, no loans to people who are migrants, no new migrants are allowed, no purchases, no health care, no benefits. You can buy health care that you can pay for yourself. No emergency rooms visits for migrants. All these things can be passed easily, and everyone would leave.
Right. But of course, we kind of saw that with Prop 187 in California, right? They did do that. They won the electoral victory. One judge threw it out, and then the state, I think under Gray Davis, refused to defend it. He got recalled out of office, but it didn't make a difference. The policy consequences were eternal, and now California is where it is today. Unfortunately, it seems like barring a radical departure, that's sort of where the whole country is going, that the system is rigged to only one outcome.
Right. But again, you turn to the thing that if the economy goes way downhill, it'll heighten the contradictions, as Marx, I think it was said, because if you're an American, you're like, I can't feed my family, but these Somalis are stealing me blind. Somalis, of course, will see this coming, and so they'll either leave or people will get down to the business of settling their debts. So, which isn't necessarily desirable, but is historically what happens.
Well, this brings up an essential point, which is that a lot of what President Trump is doing is he's trying to save the system from itself. You certainly see this internationally. Why do we care about Greenland, for example? Because if the country is going to continue, you're going to have to care about Arctic shipping. You need it as a hedge against Russia. People say like, oh, China will get it if America doesn't do it. Certainly the EU would probably be less willing to defend it from China than it is against us. And then obviously what's happening with Venezuela and everything else, and the economy and manufacturing. But at the same time, if you're on the true right, part of you is like, well, it's the current system that's leading us to our destruction. So do we really want to save this thing? And if you do get an economic downturn while the president is still in office, it's Trump and the right that's going to get all the blame. Right. So what you'd probably end up with is just this newly empowered socialist movement, which of course would also be furiously anti-white.
Absolutely. So this is a conundrum, right? That is, economic downturns accelerate necessary changes, but also harm the party in power. So, that's not something to be wished for or desired for exactly that reason. But there's really no, again, this is don't make the enemy the perfect of the good kind of thing. Because if Trump or Trump's successor loses in 2028, we'll immediately get a reign of terror that makes 2020 look small, and we'll ultimately get the 2020 we'll get the economic downturn nonetheless. Downturn, I think like the Great Depression, I think the height of unemployment, calculated unemployment, was close to 30%. But I mean, that was a very different time because back then people, first of all, that included a smaller number of things because typically only men worked, but also like almost everybody had a cousin who still worked the land, or and people didn't expect. They were more used to tightening their belts, and they had alternative ways to feed their families and so on. Right now, I mean, huge swaths of America live exclusively on government handouts of fake money that they use to buy things that they regard as essential, Netflix, phones, not just food, regarded as essential to their lives, and they don't have any possible backup plan. I mean, there's other than you running around with a gun trying to steal from other people, which is not a great backup plan in most areas of the country. So I mean,
unless you're in Minneapolis,
right? Well, I mean if you get 15% unemployment, where people are, and where the government unemployment compensation is no longer has any value, that's going to be a problem.
Well, this is kind of a segue into what you've been talking about with foundationalism and your work at the Worthy House. Talk a little bit about this applied political philosophy of foundationalism that you've talked about, because clearly if the system does end up in a kind of crisis, we are looking to something that goes beyond it. I mean, we can't – it seems pretty clear that business as usual is killing us, and one way or the other, this system is going to be brought to an end. It's just a question of who comes out on top when it happens.
The system's already been brought to an end, generically speaking, twice during the Civil War and in the New Deal. So, I mean, changing the system, it doesn't necessarily mean getting rid of the Constitution, because the Constitution bears no resemblance to the original document. And famously, the Emperor Augustus maintained all of the forms of the Roman Republic. I mean, but it was a very different system because, it just was. But you still had a Senate, and you still had consuls, and people met together and they talked, but they had no power and it had no meaning, and it was a totally different system. But we're going to get a totally different system because you always get a totally different system. I mean, regardless of the specifics of today, we're going to have a totally different system 100 years from now because that's the way history works. The question is what that system is going to look like. And, fundamentally, my little project of foundationalism, which is a series of political philosophy principles, is merely meant as a set of guideposts for people to look at when trying to recreate a more reality-based system. I'm not here to talk about like whether we should have proportional voting. I am here to say that a lot fewer people as a percentage should vote. People always say, do you think women should be denied the right to vote? And I say, I think almost everyone should be denied the right.
Right. Like, we got a lot of other people we got to deal with first.
The thing is a gotcha. I mean, generically, I think we should have household voting done by the man, but I mean, only by a very small percentage of the households. But that's not really the point of foundationalism. It's really broader that we need to reestablish a focus on reality. Where I depart company with some people on the right is I'm very kind of techno-optimist and space-oriented, so I overlap with Musk there. Though I'm anti-transhumanist, and I don't think AI. I think AI is a nothing burger, and so on. So when I say techno-optimist, I mean, for lack of a better term, old-fashioned techno-optimism.
Yeah.
We're going to take these rockets and we're going to go mine asteroids, and we're going to allow the people who did that to keep all the money rather than giving it to the parasites in society. That's what techno-optimism is, and to build a greater civilization, not to have a longhouse mud pile civilization.
Right. So, which is the essential question. I mean, at this point, it's very clear that the essential conflict is essentially between, well, as some people have said, I mean, do you want to be global Zimbabwe or do you want to be Rhodesia? I mean, this is basically where we're at.
Right. I mean, that's boiled down to a nutshell. And I prefer global Rhodesia. Thanks.
Right.
And so, I mean, anybody who's of sound mind and not a parasite thinks the same thing, even if he's not willing to say it in public. So, I mean, it's a longer historical thing, but it's 100% accurate and indisputable. But I mean, back to our earlier thing, none of these things, like, I'm not a big ideology person. foundationalism isn't meant as like follow these 12 steps and you'll have a utopia. It's follow these 12 things in their broad outlines, and your society will be better than the crappy society we have today, but it'll have problems because every society has problems. It's like a question of vice, right? Like I think all homosexuals should be put back in the closet, but that doesn't mean that homosexuality isn't going to continue sub rosa. You just keep vice of various forms, gambling, prostitution, homosexuals, down to a dull roar and not in the public eye and not exposed to our children. When they grow up, if they want
to, the best you can do with most of these things.
Children grow up and they fall into vice. Well, that's unfortunate, but I hate to break it to some people, but every society has had people who fall into vice.
Right.
So the idea of having a perfect society is always silly, and I think even on the right there are some people who fall into that. Every right-wing society or reality-based society has had plenty of problems, and we're going to have problems in the future. If we spread out throughout the solar system, we're going to have problems. We probably have bigger problems in some sense, not civilizational problems perhaps, but structural problems. This is a common science fiction trope where people spread out into the solar system and then start throwing asteroids at each other.
Yeah, right. Because then, if people are going to develop different identities and then they'll start conflicting with each other. But of course, before we can even get to that point, we have to escape the global slum that's developing here.
Yes.
And I guess the big question is, if you look at the way our system is set up, and you say to yourself, because leftist theory will say, oh, the right wing, the capitalists, the bourgeoisie are going to back all these things. And of course, that's not how it actually works. Because if you are wealthy, if you are educated, if you have a bit of property, the way our system is set up actually makes sense for you because you get to enjoy cheap labor, the costs of which are dumped on the taxpayers. And for a lot of these people, what your job is you're an administrator, you're a government worker, you're in some sense dependent on government patronage, you're running an NGO, you're doing some sort of social control mechanism, and you get to enjoy a lot of power via that. That's if you're in academia or human relations or something like that. So you understand why most wealthy people, or at least a lot more than left-wing theory would predict, are in fact the base of the radical left, that it's precisely the most educated people, that it's precisely a lot of the so-called elite human capital that is actually on the other side. But if we're going to get anywhere, I mean, you and I both know that elites tend to run the show when all is said and done. You're going to need to get some elite defections from this. Do you see any evidence that, to return to what we talked about at the beginning, aside from some of the big names that we have mentioned, do you see any evidence that there's a class or a social base for a new right to emerge here? Or are we basically stuck with populism?
There's no signs of it. But historically speaking, and I think that the current, it's Gaetano Mosca's governing and non-governing elite, roughly 20% of the population who have the wealth and power. And that's basically what we're talking about here.
Right.
I think there's a higher percentage than is typical historically that are ideologically motivated. But most of them, as you say, are motivated by having their noses in the trough. And the historical inevitable arc of things is that the vast majority of those people will simply adopt new modes and orders. And the classic example I always like to give of this is the French Revolution. There were all these people whose names you've never heard of, but are in the historical record, who, in 1785 were monarchists, and then they were Jacobins, and then they were Directorymen, and then they were all for Napoleon. So people will simply, the vast majority of the non-governing elite in particular, will simply shift their beliefs to fit whatever is now dominant. And so it's really not it's a bit more of a problem, I think, for us, because so many of those people, historically, most non-governing elites had at least something to offer the society. They didn't always frequently they didn't have a lot of talent, or they got that way because their cousin was somebody or what have you. So let's not overstate the degree of virtue and productivity of these people. But our class is largely much more parasitical, like doesn't offer any value, whatever. Their jobs create net negative social value. So they would have to be put to work doing something else in order to maintain their position within the elite, rather than simply saying, well, I now think X rather than I think Y, but I want to continue my bullshit DEI job.
Right.
So what that would look like is unclear. There's not really great historical examples of this, because the 20th century is the first time, other than revolutionary France, where you really had a high level of ideology involved in the governing elite. Most countries, even throughout the 20th century, did not have a high level of ideology in the governing elite. And so we have this weird situation where we have a highly incompetent and parasitical, yet highly ideological governing and non-governing elite. How many of those people could be allowed to be in the future same slice of class really isn't clear. These things have a way of sorting themselves out. Sometimes nicely, sometimes not nicely.
Right.
But to answer your question, my opinion is that the more competent and less parasitical slices of that group will simply blow with the wind. So if there is a big enough change that tends in the right-wing direction, they'll simply adopt a new set of people to whom they effectively pay their allegiance.
Mm. The problem, of course, is that we're dealing with a number of historically unprecedented circumstances. One, I think, as you brought up before, if you look at the number of single women who will openly say there needs to be violence against the right. Now, of course, they're not capable of wielding that violence themselves, but as long as we have the current system, that's a voting base. And so as long as people continue to obey orders from the government, like, you're going to get that kind of violence if that's what's directed. I mean, that's something that's kind of new. The idea of people being forced into starvation or something like that. Maybe I'm being too optimistic, but this seems like such a distant thing. It's not like the French Revolution where you have desperate peasants that are storming all these things because it's a question of life or death. People are not desperate enough, and it's hard to imagine a situation in our society where they would be desperate enough, because if there's one thing America does not lack, it's food. And then the last thing, of course, being that technology has a way of providing a sort of escapism for a lot of different people. And even if people see how bad the society is, even if they've just given up, and I certainly see this with a lot of younger people, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, younger, they've already thrown in the towel on life. Like, they already take for granted they're never going to get married. They may never even get with a girl. They're not going to get a house. They're not going to do any of these things, but they don't care. Like, it doesn't lead them to radicalism. It leads them into escapism.
Yes.
And then, of course, we have these huge masses of foreigners. And there does come a point, and this is, I guess, where I break with a lot of people on the hard right who say, well, we need to be uncompromising with the administration and everything else. Like, there does come a point where the numbers just aren't there anymore. I mean, as bad as Zimbabwe is, there's not a way you can, like, bring back Rhodesia because there are no white people there. So what are you going to do?
I'm not saying that America is going to survive. I mean, I'm very kind of bullish on America, and I think America is in many ways historically unique as a nation. But there's nothing that says America is going to survive, and of course, America isn't going to survive on a long enough time frame.
Yeah, right.
I mean, the people who live in America,
we're not exempt from history, right?
Come back in 10,000 years.
Yeah. That's what you think, commie.
So, I mean, it's all we can do is what we can with the time we are given. Time meaning the time we have to do things, and the time meaning the time in which we have been placed. And those are huge problems. And in many ways, they seem like insurmountable problems. But it's also true that history has a way of providing Gordian knot solutions. Right. And so, our I think, aim is simply to keep struggling within the system as it currently exists. And the fact that we have Trump doing Trumpian things in a way that was completely inconceivable 5 or 10 years ago, is an indication that that's not a complete waste of time. I mean, certainly, there's plenty of Republicans who want us to return to the days of Mitt Romney and so on. But as you said already, we can't really go back to that. So, yes, it's true, we may end up losing. And this place, America may turn into outpost of some kind of shit place like Somalia. But, I mean, maybe not. Who can say?
Do you think that there's any historical model we can look to right now? Because again, we are in these unprecedented circumstances. A lot of people on our side, I think you may have talked about this in the past too, talk about the Spanish Civil War, which is like the great essential battle of right versus left. But when you look at the Spanish Civil War, and this is something I've been looking into a lot recently, when you look at the right, the Spanish right of that time, you have all these traditional institutions which simply do not exist anymore. I mean, the idea of the Catholic Church as the bastion of tradition or right-wing social forces is just completely insane from today's perspective. I mean, it was just a very different animal back then. And certainly, if you look at the way, the kind of cult of militarism and masculine heroism that you saw on both the left and the right, this idea that the way you earn victory is by going out there and fighting for it, as opposed to basically pretending to be a victim in front of the cameras. This also seems totally different. Like if we had some kind of a civil conflict now, rather than fighting, I think both sides would be just trying to show themselves to be weak and pathetic and try to win public sympathy. And there's not really a historical model for that. That's not the way revolutionaries used to act.
Not at all. I mean, the feminization of modernity in America, but also other countries, is again completely unprecedented. And one of the best articles I've ever written is an article by Michael Anton, and I think it was in New Criterion, called "Unprecedented," where I don't know if he mentioned specifically, but he talks about all the ways in which the modern situation that we are in is unprecedented. It's an extremely good article. But the Spanish Civil War isn't hugely useful for historical and analogical precedents for the reasons you outlined. It's mostly useful for seeing how human nature intersects with ideology in these kind of conflicts. It would certainly come out differently or in different manifestations in America. So I always point to, and I wrote a long piece on the Finnish Civil War of 1919. Nobody has ever heard of, but I think in some ways is more analogous to the American situation. Though, of course, Finland was a tiny country in a very different situation, but it was a very brief and very nasty civil war in which, in the usual way, and similar to the Spanish Civil War, the left kept pushing and the right, and then started the Civil War, and then the right came down. I think 1% of Finland's population died in like 5 months. So, I mean, you still there?
Yes, you were breaking up for a second. Go ahead.
And so, but again, that's a very inexact historical analogy for many of the same reasons. We're just a much more feminized society, et cetera. I think that it's just, I think it's unwise to get caught up in, well, this is an interesting line of discussion. It's not like I don't like having this line of discussion. This falls a little bit to the category of what I talked about earlier, which is that people want to know future with certainty rather than focus on what they can do now. What they can do now is to rebuild some of those things that made right victory in the Spanish Civil War possible, which mostly includes social organization of various kinds. I mean, the Finnish, when the Finnish right was preparing for war, the major vehicle was rural firefighting leagues. So, all the local men got together to learn firefighting and also some rifle shooting on the side. And so those kind of things, I think, are particularly helpful. And of course, building up assets, because no doubt some kind of economic collapse or catastrophe is likely to intersect with any future violence. Having the ability to feed your family, whether that's because you have a little land or you have a garden or you have a little gold put away or what have you, it allows you to do things that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So a lot of this, I might sound like a prepper where I sit around and bury my gold in my backyard kind of thing. But you do want to
do worse.
Well, sure. But I mean, the preparing for the future, I think, is in some ways more important than trying to figure out what's going to happen, given that our current society is so different. I mean, it's an interesting thought experiment. I'm not down on it, but we just don't know. There's just no way of knowing because, as Anton says, it's unprecedented.
Right. Well, certainly in terms of social organization, I mean, one of the things that you sort of pathologies, I would even say, on the American right uniquely, is this idea of if you just accumulate enough gold and guns and food and then just kind of hold up in your backyard, you'll be able to survive what's coming. But generally, if things did go to hell, it's actually going to be people who have the best organized tribes, who have the best organized social organizations who are going to win. And if you look at something like the collapse of the USSR, the guys who ended up becoming local elites tended to be the guys who were already kind of in charge in those areas.
Yeah.
They just called themselves nationalists now instead of communists or whatever else.
Yeah.
So what are the sorts of social organizations that people should be building now? Like, what is something they can actually do with the understanding that we do not know what the future holds?
I think that everything depends upon where you are in life, both physically and in age and so on. But the number one thing is simply getting to know other people around you. So when you're online, it doesn't really help that you have a lot of Twitter mutuals, right? I mean, it's nice, and
Oh God, you just completely destroyed my self-image. I need to rethink my entire life now.
Oh, you get a dopamine hit when you get those.
I need it. I mean, that's why I get up in the morning.
So, Gen Xer, which I am, but you people who spend all their time online, whether that's politically or playing video games or on sports betting or similarly unproductive and useless activities. I mean, I don't think Twitter or X is useless at all. I just don't think it should substitute for getting to know people locally.
Yeah, it's a means to an end, right?
But most people don't use it as a means to an end. They use it that's an end in itself. Now, I do think though that to a degree that most people don't appreciate, people self-organize in times of trouble. I mean, you see this even in things like hurricanes. People,
yeah.
of course, who really don't spend any time, all of a sudden are doing patrols together because that's the way that at least heritage Americans are able to organize. You can regain to a certain extent the high trust society under conditions of stress if the other people are enough like you. I mean, obviously, you wouldn't start doing that with the Somali migrants. They have nothing for you in a stress situation. They just need to get expelled. But I think that again, I mean, I kind of sound like a broken record, but the future will reveal itself, and there's certain things you can do. And having a bunch of golden guns is not self-executing, but given that people will self-organize in conditions of stress, having the guns is very important. I mean, you want to know which end is which, but you also don't need to go. Some people are like, you need to go 2 weeks a year of tactical.
Yeah, right.
Over for you. I mean, the fact is that throughout history, people who have barely known how to use a bolt-action gun have been very effective in times of societal stress. So, high-functioning guns are now ubiquitous in America. I mean, it's just ludicrous how many guns there are. And those things can be put to good use in any condition of societal stress. So I think that the golden guns thing is to a certain extent underrated as a thing. It's not self-executing, but it's certainly would be helpful if things deteriorate in America.
Well, this is the thing that concerns me. I mean, one of the things I always say is that the right talks about power all the time. Here are these thick books about power and the nature of power, but the left just does it. And in many ways, it's because it's so hypocritical and self-righteous and unaware of its own motivations. Like, that's actually why it's so effective. It's actually good to be unconscious of your own motivations because you just do stuff and don't agonize over it. And in the same way, those of us on the right are always the ones talking about, well, you need to be local institutions, you need to have all these sorts of things. But then when you look at the left now, like the ability to organize, to follow around ICE agents, to have a variety of different tactics where you have some people using militant action, you have some people documenting, you have some people working within the system, you have some people working directly against the system, you have some people even using violence, and everybody all covering for each other, and the Democrats in Congress echoing this rhetoric. All of this suggests that the left is a lot better at building these sorts of social organizations than the right. Now, of course, I understand that a lot of this is funded by our money, NGOs that are funded by tax dollars. But it does seem that the right talks about these sorts of things more than it actually does them.
I think that's certainly true. And certainly the right is capable, both today and historically, of organizing. I mean, there's plenty of retards on the left, but those people are typically not allowed to have any kind of leadership role. I think the main distinction, though, there is that, and this has been true for decades in America, at least since World War II, probably before, The left is able to do this because they fear no kind of pushback or punishment of any kind.
Right. That's exactly right.
And if you combine that with the total feminization, the fact is that if these people went, Antifa types, the hardcore types, as opposed to like random, people like that woman who got shot in Minneapolis, if these people went to their direct action and they knew there was a non-zero chance that a hail of bullets would just mow them all down, no one would show up. I mean, yeah, a few people might show up, but the fact is that violence against people who are breaking the law, like those people are, is the traditional way of dealing with violent demonstrators like Antifa trying to overthrow the government. Just the left has been permitted to use violence to overthrow the government and to kill its enemies for decades. And whereas on the right, if you walk around the Capitol, of course, you're thrown in jail and so on.
Yeah, you go to jail for 40 years unless the president pardons you.
So the key strategic, or rather tactical thing is to put fear into the left. That doesn't mean that I think we should go around committing acts of violence ourselves extra legally. That is frequently the way history ends up. I certainly don't think we're there. I don't recommend people do that.
No, I understand. But I mean, you mean through the state, through legitimate authority.
I mean, I would wholly support if next time a bunch of Antifa people come out and attack a federal building, they just mount a couple M60s and mow them all down. You're trying to kill people in a federal building by burning it down. This happens all the time. That's in self-defense. Executing all a few people in self-defense is perfectly appropriate. And then no one's going to do it again. I mean, that's a bit over the top. I mean, maybe you just want to fire a few shots above the crowd, take it in steps. Maybe that would be enough. So, I'm not saying we need to go whole hog now, but it's perfectly legitimate for the government to respond to attempts to kill the agents of the government by killing the people who are trying to kill the agents of the government. I mean, this is the way the world works. But the left knows that it's never subject to the same rules as the right would be in a similar situation. So once they're made subject to the normal rules of civilized life, which is that you're not allowed to use violence to achieve your political goals, then they're going to disappear. Because frankly, they're all pussies. I mean, yeah, sure, there's a hard core that's not pussies, but most of those people are insane. That's the trannies.
Yeah. There's a reason that all these shooters tend to be trannies. Yeah.
I mean, if Lenin comes back and he looks around at the left, I mean, he would just be appalled at Lenin, and people always get down on me for saying positive things about Lenin. I mean, Lenin was a very bad guy, but the fact is that he was a super disciplined guy who, flipped a coin 50 times and came up tails, so he ended up in charge. But, he was the kind of guy who looked around and he made sensible statements that were meant to achieve his goals, and he didn't allow idiots to run the show. The idiots are running the left show for right now. It just looks like they're getting stuff done because it's all gravy and no vegetables for them. Give them some vegetables, right, and then they won't show up anymore.
Well, if you had this kind of thing, because I've always thought that the way the right wins, because I just doubt the self-organizational capacity of the right to have the sorts of groups that the left do, whether in terms of organized violence, whether in terms of political activism, whether even in terms of just lobbying. I mean, it's hard enough getting people to show up to a city council meeting or something like that.
Sure.
But if you look at the state, you can essentially have the left rebel against the state, and then you use the state to put them down. Arguably, that's what's happening now. But then when you see the reaction to this shooting, I mean, those of us who have seen the video say, look, obviously it was a lawful shooting. It was a good shoot. She tried to run him over, open and shut. There's no situation where if I do the same thing, if I got pulled over or something, where I don't get shot.
Right.
That would obviously happen. But if you look at public opinion, it has turned against ICE significantly in recent weeks. People are falling for this to some extent. So can you even use violence, even legitimate violence, even violence in self-defense or against threats without losing the public? Or is there just no other way in this feminized society of ours except the disingenuous game of pretending that we're victims too? Because, I mean, there are those who say that white people should start, or conservatives, whatever you want to call it, should basically say, we're the real victims, we're the people who are being acted upon by power. But I just don't think that works for us.
No, I don't think that works. And you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, the fundamental problem is that feminine emotivism, free of all logic, is the primary framing of most discourse most political discourse in America today. And it's tied to the thing you said initially, which is that the right wing simply doesn't want to do political work because that's not how people on the right get their meaning. The problem is that you have vast numbers of left-wing people who get their meaning from acting to advance their political goals, and that will never be matched by the right. So the only ultimate solution is to make politics the concern of only a very small fraction of society. In a well-run society, only a small percentage of people, all men, are involved in politics and in the political give and take and whirl. We don't have that. We have the opposite. And so to the extent the public opinion matters through the frame of feminine emotivism, well, there's really no solution for that. Claiming victimhood isn't going to work. And so I don't have a solution, so we're just going to put one foot in front of the other and see what happens.
Yeah, right. Well, certainly what people talk about on our side all the time, I mean, it's become a refrain so often that it's almost cringe, but I mean, what else can you say, is crossing the Rubicon, is this idea that the only way we're going to get out of this is basically a strong executive figure who breaks the judiciary, who ignores Congress, who governs the nation in a way that we actually haven't been governed since, I don't know, FDR. Somebody who has personal accountability for what he's doing to the country. And Trump has obviously, this is what the left is accusing Trump of doing, and I think this is what on the right a lot of people want Trump to do. But is Trump the guy, and does that even work in the American system? Because short of a Caesar, a Napoleon type figure, and I don't mean, I would actually say Napoleon III is closer to the model of what we're talking about. Somebody who is within the current system and then gives himself more authority and imposes a new political order while keeping some of the structure of the old regime. Without somebody doing something like that, I have a hard time seeing how we get from A to B.
No, you don't really. I mean, and Trump's not the guy, obviously, because he's old,
honestly,
boomer, and so on. And the problem is that the current system is completely controlled by the left, like the media ecosystem. We have all these other problems we've identified. It's almost impossible for someone like that to show up. On the other hand, it's always, and this kind of goes back to what I said earlier, the history always has strange twists. I mean, as is generally well known, Franco was very late to join the attempt to restore order in Spain, and he only became the maximum leader, for lack of a better term, because the guy, I forget his name, Mola maybe, who
it was either Mola or Son. I think it was Mola. Yeah,
got killed in a plane crash, right?
Because he packed too many uniforms.
Right. So otherwise we never have heard of Franco. He'd just be a footnote to whatever did happen in the Spanish Civil War. Otherwise, so as they say, cometh the hour, cometh the man. That's a historical guarantee. The man may be the wrong man. He may be. I don't believe in Blue Caesar. I think Blue Caesar is a contradiction in terms. But that doesn't mean you'll get the right guy. But you'll get someone who will make things different because that's just the way it works.
We'll talk a little bit about some of your efforts. I mean, obviously, you've got the Worthy House, and you've been involved in some other organizations. But in terms of preparing the ground for what comes next, what is it that you're trying to achieve with your work right now? Because I want to make sure that people know where to find you and know what you think are the most critical things that they should be looking at right now.
Right. So I write at the Worthy House, which is originally and still kind of is a book review site. I write reviews, but as I like to say, the book reviews aren't really book reviews. They're my thoughts masquerading.
Right. Right.
So I do talk about the books to be fair. And I think that what am I trying to accomplish? I'm trying to be I'm too old, and by personality, don't want to be the guy in charge. When I was younger, I thought of course I would be president. Like a lot of young men, when I was like 25, I'm like, of course, I'll be president. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be president now, and I think I would not do well as actual maximum leader of anything beyond my house, or maybe a slightly wider area. But I think helping people understand where we are in historical context is a useful exercise. and helping people speak clearly in long form. That is, I'm not down on X. I think X is very useful, but I think people, I tend to write long pieces that are meant to fit into a coherent whole. And since there's 600 something of them on my site now, and no one reads the old ones, of course, sadly. But I'm trying to present a coherent vision of what a future society in broad outline should look like. And hopefully that's some kind of public service. I don't charge any money. I have a lot of money, so I don't need to make money. And so I think it's funny because I never really thought about that. First time I've ever been asked that specific question. I guess I'm trying to make the world for our children better than it might be otherwise through the vehicle of helping people understand where we are and where we could be.
Yeah, I think, it's a question that doesn't get asked a lot. I mean, I guess that's why I asked it. But at some point, you do have to justify your life, because I remember, people ask why are you doing this? And it's like such an obvious question, but you actually have to step back and think about it for a second. Why exactly am I doing this as opposed to literally everything else I could be doing? Some of which, let's face it, day in and day out may be more pleasurable or enjoyable than burying your head in the agonies of the age and trying to figure out what to do about it. But it has to be done. I mean, that's the best answer I can give.
I don't want to claim too much for myself because it's not like I'm bearing a lot of costs like some people on the right are. I live in Indiana. No one's ever going to attack me. If they did, it would probably end poorly. And
right.
And so I can't be canceled. So I don't want to overstate it like I'm some kind of heroic figure showing people the way. But hopefully it helps some people out.
Well, it does. I mean, everyone has spoken very highly of you, and I've been following your work for a very long time. So for those people who don't know where to find you, where can they find you, and what programs do you have coming out right now, and is there anything that you're coming up with soon? What's the next review on your plate?
So I'm at theworthyhouse.com and also on X at theworthyhouse, and I cross-post the stuff to the long-form post to Substack. So Substack is growing because I just actually started cross-posting a couple months ago. So what's coming up? That's actually a great question. So two things are coming up. I'm working my way through all of Carl Schmitt's work. So I'm now working on the Nomos of the Earth.
No small thing right there. You say it so casually. You're like, well, I'm working through all of Carl Schmitt's work.
Well, when you sit down to write it, I always hold my head in my hands. I tell my wife, this is going to break me. So I did a Schmitt's book on Thomas Hobbes, The Leviathan and the State Theory of Thomas Hobbes last year, and it did almost break me, but I got through it, and I think it was a good review. And then the other book is a long history of the Percy family of Northumberland, who the kings in the north. So the Percy family, which still exists to this day, was for a long time the most powerful English noble family on the Scottish borderlands, basically on the English side of the Scottish borderlands. That's a fascinating book. I'm going to write a great review about that. So I'm really excited about that. No one will read it. They don't like reviews as much. But
well, I saw one of your reviews was about the idea of, I still have to read the book, about building a legacy. And I think that's, the idea of a family building a legacy through the generations as opposed to, well, it sadly seems to be the creed now where you basically spend all your money and die broke and leave your kids nothing. And I think that's the fundamental difference between the true right and the true left in terms of mindset, that we're trying to build something that goes beyond just us. And to some extent, living for yourself is idiotic because in the end, it's just totally meaningless. But if you're building a legacy that lasts not just for generations, but for centuries, then you're actually talking about something real.
That is an excellent point. And the book is Johann Kurtz's Leaving a Legacy.
That's right. Yes.
But you actually make a really good point. This is actually one of the most powerful tools or weapons the right has, which is that the left is self-extinguishing itself in many ways. Whether that's immediately through various forms of self-mutilation or simply by not having children. The long-term prognosis for the right in that narrow area is good. Of course, you have to get rid of the migrants and for that to happen.
Right.
But there's something to be said for the fact that, and I don't think we should overstate it, but young men are turning significantly to the right as well. And since young men are the people who tend to be able to accomplish change, even if, as you say, they're enervated or they're entertained or what have you, I'm optimistic about the future. I'm not a pessimist. I'm very optimistic about the future.
That's a great note to end it on. Sure, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate all the work you're doing. And I hope our viewers take a look at your website, The Worthy House. A lot of great reviews there, and certainly one of the best commentators on the New Right today.
Thank you.
All right. So in the early years of the Soviet Union, little history here, but very relevant to our own time, there was a cult of personality created around this boy named Pavlik Morozov. Now, what he supposedly did was he denounced his own father to the KGB, or whatever they were calling it at that time, for subversive activities. And this became the biggest thing ever. There were statues, there were songs, there was an opera in his honor. Joseph Stalin used the whole story for political advantage, but privately he said, quote, "What a little swine," denouncing his own father. George Orwell definitely knew about this case. He probably drew on it when he wrote The Spies, that group in 1984, which is a group of children systematically turned into ungovernable little savages who inform on their families. You all remember that. Now, we live in this, though. This is something increasingly common. We see it all the time in 2016. So, for example, Stephen Miller's uncle wrote an article trading on the family relationship to call him an immigration hypocrite. Back in 2018, this guy, David Glosser, who I guess is his uncle, said that because the family fled the czar, Mr. Miller has a moral duty to fight President Trump's immigration policies. He said his nephew has become the architect of immigration policies that repudiate the very foundation of our family's life in this country. Now, of course, if this is the way it actually works, if you let in a single guy and then you're obligated to let in everyone and their descendants because they're all going to lobby for it forever, what you should actually do is call in artillery before you let in a single person for any reason. Like, this actually proves that Miller is nothing compared to what we actually need. We need to be like deporting entire families going back generations because apparently they're just inherently traitors according to their own arguments. But, of course, few agree with me on that. At the time, this whole story selling out his nephew was celebrated by the Huffington Post, Philadelphia Inquirer, CNN, and you see cases like this all the time. Bob Goodlatte, he was Republican here in Virginia. I think he was actually my congressman. He got denounced by his own son. His son bragged about donating the maximum amount to his opponent. This, of course, got circulated by all these different outlets. There's this whole trope. There's this whole genre, really, of stories where you denounce your relatives at Thanksgiving or whatever for being racist. They even publish tutorials on how you can do this more effectively. And you do this because it might be the launching point of a career. So, this one famous case, this girl's family says, "Oh, we don't want you having a black boyfriend." This becomes international news. She does a fundraiser. Like, this is her whole life. And we even have parents denouncing their kids now. There was this article in The Cut years ago. "I lost my son to the alt-right movement. There are all these guides, how to prevent your children from falling to the alt-right." And this has certainly affected a lot of people in our sphere. I think Mike Enoch's dad denounced him, Ricky Vaughn's, Captive Dreamer on X, random attendees at Charlottesville. I mean, you can think of plenty of people who have had to go through this. I think Jason Kessler was doing like a live stream or something years ago and his dad yelled at him. I don't even think it was about politics. It was just because he was doing a live stream. This was international news. I mean, maybe you watching this have been denounced by family. This is just the reality we live in. Two things bring this to mind. So right now it's being reported that teens are doxing their fathers on TikTok because they work for ICE. And of course, they're being praised by the media for doing this. Now they're endangering themselves as well as their family, but this is still a morally correct thing to do for those who have orthodox opinions. And then, of course, and I hate to bring this up, but I mean, it's just too good. You have the saga of Ashley St. Clair, this sort of conservative influencer, managed to get herself knocked up by Elon Musk. I don't know if she didn't get enough money or what, but now she's decided he's pure evil. We need to shut down X, at least free speech. She's reversed all of her opinions. She wrote this children's book, which attacked the idea of like trans kids. But now, of course, she's reversed her opinion on that. She's removing her own name as the author of the children's book that critiqued this idea. Now, of course, this is all happening because the relationship didn't end the way she wanted. Hopefully, she's not going to try to trune out Elon's kid. But, I mean, there's a warning here about e-celebs. More broadly, it's not even uncommon at this point to see these sorts of things. People denouncing each other in relationships, parents denouncing kids, kids denouncing parents. In traditional societies, a person's status largely depended on relationships with family and clan. Today, a person's public image, as reported by the media, makes much more difference in terms of income potential, keeping a job, living in peace and safety. So how do people behave? You're only going to see more of this after they go after the idea of family itself. I mean, you've heard this, right? Like only your chosen family matters. Look for that message in TV shows or movies, or in academia for that matter. There are no people you inherently have an obligation to. Why should you care about your kid? Why should you care about your parents? You didn't rationally choose these things. And the idea that there are certain confidences that should not be betrayed no matter what, that's completely gone. I mean, this goes to the very heart of the idea of a society totally without honor. And in a society where there are no unchosen affiliations or obligations, media has all power. And people who are willing to sell others out for clout get more power. And the fact is that status is more important to people than anything else. Even the obligation between parent and child or child and parent is in a lot of cases secondary to the quest for status. And part of that, again, is because family obligation was the way you built status in the past. And now it's almost a social liability. Now, how do we stop this, of course? Well, that's a big question. Don't talk to reporters for one thing. You cut off those who work with liberal media. Maybe don't bring everybody into your political circle of confidence. God knows I can tell you stories about that. I mean, more broadly, you need like a sweeping social revolution. But really, it comes down to you can't take for granted elemental loyalties that have existed in every society except ours. Like Stalin knew real morality better than a typical journalist or liberal activist. He showed more moral ambiguity about what had just happened than anybody who works at the New York Times. Or for that matter, any employee at some conservative nonprofit who then sells out their colleagues, or some e-celeb who wants attention. And there's a contradiction here, right? If you think about the way these stories are framed. Like, we need to take condemnation by family extremely seriously because it's family. But if the condemnation even exists, then family means nothing. So why should we care? This is the atmosphere in which we live. This is a society without honor. And here's the key. You don't owe any respect or even consideration to this kind of moral code. It's entirely cynical. And so you got to operate the same way. Hold true to your own standards. Don't give any respect to theirs, not even rhetorically. They don't have any for you, and they don't have anything worth respecting. You mock them, you scorn them, you move on. And these sorts of tactics only work if you take them seriously. And remember, it's not just your chosen obligations that matter. From a right-wing perspective, I think it's the ones you are born with and that are inherent and that are unchosen that matter most, because that's what makes you who you are. See you next time.